Order. Good morning. I call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. This morning we have with us Tourism Nova Scotia, and we'll be discussing the tourism, the very bountiful tourism season we're continuing to have in the province. Let's start with introductions, beginning with Mr. Michele.
Good morning and welcome. Hugh Michele, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's.
Good morning. Brendan McGuire, Halifax Atlantic.
Benjamin Jessam, and I represent Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Good morning, Rafa Di Costanzo, and I'm MLA Clayton Park.
Good morning and welcome. Gordon Wilson, MLA for Clare Digby.
Good morning, welcome. My name is Tim Houston. I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
And I'm Lisa Roberts, CMLA for Halifax Needham. My colleague from Sackville Cobequid will be joining us shortly.
Alan McMaster, MLA for Inverness, your chair. We also have with us the Auditor General's office this morning.
Hi, I'm Michael Pickup, Auditor General. Morning.
And our guests, you may introduce yourselves, beginning with Ms. Moran on the right.
Good morning, Anna Moran, and I am the Manager of Research, Planning and Decision Support with Tourism Nova Scotia.
I'm Michele Saran. I'm the CEO of Tourism Nova Scotia.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Johnson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Tourism Nova Scotia.
Just a reminder for everyone to make sure your phones are on silent so we don't have interruptions. And Ms. Saran, you can begin with opening comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here this morning to discuss Tourism Nova Scotia and some of the great work that's happening across the province to grow Nova Scotia's tourism economy. As they introduce themselves, I'm joined today by Tourism Nova Scotia's Chief Operating Officer, Michael Johnson, and our Manager of Research, Planning and Decision Support, Anna Moran. I'd like to acknowledge Ian Thompson, who's the Vice Chair of the Board of Tourism Nova Scotia, and Lisa Starr of the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia, who are seated upstairs in the gallery. The Ivany Report, which was released in 2014, challenged the tourism industry to increase tourism revenues to $4 billion by 2024. Tourism Nova Scotia was established as a private sector-led Crown Corporation in April 2015. We were given a mandate to drive sustainable tourism growth and maximize the value of tourism to Nova Scotia's economy. In just 3 short years, we've made big changes to allow us to deliver on this mandate. We're working collaboratively with businesses, community-based organizations, and all levels of government to reach that $4 billion goal. To drive substantial revenue growth, we've developed an export strategy to bring new money to the province. Our marketing and sector development initiatives, investments, and programs align with the plan's 4 pillars, which are attracting first-time visitors, investing in markets of highest return, focusing on world-class experiences that will motivate travel to the province, and building tourism confidence. To help reduce duplication and make limited resources go further, our strategy clarifies stakeholder roles and encourages innovation, collaboration, and private sector initiative. For example, it's the role of all levels of government to enable tourism growth by considering policies that will improve the operating environment for tourism businesses. It's the role of tourism operators to market and sell their products, drive repeat visitation through exceptional customer service, and invest in their businesses to stay current and remain competitive. It's the role of communities and local tourism organizations to develop attractive destinations that draw visitors, deliver on visitor needs such as parking and washrooms, and provide information to visitors that will keep them in given areas longer. Tourism is a complex sector with many passionate stakeholders. At the provincial level alone, Events East operates the convention centre that attracts meetings and convention delegates to Nova Scotia alongside Discover Halifax. The Department of Communities, Culture and Heritage operates provincial museums and provides funding to events and cultural initiatives that visitors can enjoy while they're here. The Department of Natural Resources operates the provincial parks. Waterfront Development Corporation has the responsibility for the 2 most visited sites in the province, that being Halifax and Lunenburg waterfronts. And the Department of Business works closely with us to advance our strategy. Tourism Nova Scotia is approaching things differently to maximize growth opportunities. Operationally, we're in the process of finalizing a corporate scorecard built on accountability measures established by government, which we'll use to track our performance. We report on our activities and our results annually. We invest in research to inform our decision-making. We survey stakeholders to see how we're doing, and we assess results and course correct as necessary. Our marketing campaigns are consumer tested, and we promote experiences that motivate travel and differentiate us from other destinations. We're aligned with Canada's tourism marketing organization, Destination Canada, and we partner to extend our marketing reach into international markets. We no longer fund initiatives, we co-invest with our industry for the benefit of both the province and the participating partners. In 2017, tourism businesses and organizations invested $500,000 in our digital marketing and inspiring content programs. We matched their contributions for a total investment of $1,047,000. You can view some of those amazing photos and video assets on our website at novascotia.com. Tourism Nova Scotia also works with operators to develop world-class experiences. Through our World-Class Experience Accelerator program, we test concepts with potential visitors and look for businesses to develop the ones that have the most appeal. We coach participants and provide research, photography, and video assets to help them launch and promote their experience. Now, in our second year of offering the program, we're proud to report Nova Scotia has 23 new experiences that are capturing the attention of visitors from around the world. Experiences like flying aprons, dining on the ocean floor at Burnt Coat Head, and Pleasant Paddling's private island yurt for two on Blue Rocks Islands on the South Shore. We're thrilled with our industry's commitment to elevate our competitiveness as a destination, and it's also exciting to be recognized by other jurisdictions as a trailblazer, particularly in how we partner with the industry. Final 2017 tourism results will be released in February, but what I can tell you now, however, is that Nova Scotia is celebrating 4 consecutive years of record growth, and business is booming. At the end of November, we have welcomed 2.3 million non-resident overnight visitors to the province, which is a 9% increase over last year. Preliminary estimates suggest that tourism revenues will reach $2.7 billion. That's $100 million more than last year and $700 million more than 2010. These results are not by chance. We're working hard, we're working collaboratively, and we're working strategically to inspire visitors to visit and choose Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saran. We'll start with Mr. Houston of the PC Caucus for 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for those opening comments. So tourism, there's a lot of optimism around tourism for sure. The numbers seem to be going up. People like that. Nova Scotians like that. Have you done any kind of analysis that would be able to show what the impact of lower gas prices might be on tourism?
Absolutely. There's a lot of factors that influence a visitor's decision to come to a destination. Lower gas prices certainly have been kind to us, along with a number of other factors like the exchange rate, keeping visitors at home, encouraging Americans to come here. It was really like the perfect storm of greatness this past year. Everything led up to having a great tourism season that we did have. Certainly our marketing comes into play as well. We've had 2 of our most successful campaigns in history the past 2 years. So everything, the stars aligned quite beautifully for us this past season.
Yeah, but are you able to say which stars aligning contributed which? Like, because those are the things that I hear a lot. Well, lower gas prices and the dollar. We didn't have to spend a nickel on advertising. Our tourism would have went up, or something that people say. So it would be curious if you've. I would be curious to see if you've done any analysis to say, well, yeah, that certainly helped, but in the grand scheme of things, it helped this much as opposed to 100%. I'm
going to pass this over to our research person, Anna.
Ms. Moran.
Thank you for the question. This analysis we have not completed. We do rely on organizations that we partner with, like Destination Canada, and other national research organizations to do this type of analysis. We have received some information related to how the exchange rate has an influence on whether or not people stay and travel within Canada, and whether they travel outside of Canada. And I don't have the exact numbers, but I can certainly access that study and provide some information afterwards. I know we talked about this before. From a price of gasoline, one of the things that we have seen is when the price of gas goes down, what we do tend to see is an increase in people who are arriving in the province by car, and we tend to see a bit of a decrease in the proportion of visitors who are arriving by air. Not a decrease in the number of visitors arriving by air, but when we look at the overall visitor population, we'll see the proportion of car go up a bit. The other thing that we do is we assess our marketing efforts campaign by campaign, and we have some very good measures on how well our campaign is performing in terms of having an impact on the desire to visit Nova Scotia.
Okay. So in terms of the, if we talk about the gasoline for a second, if lower gas prices, then you would tend to see more arrivals by car. And are you seeing that?
We did actually. If you think back a few years when the price of gas really plummeted, when it was kind of down around the dollar mark, that's really when we saw an increase in the proportion of car visitors versus air visitors. What we're seeing so far this year, and let me just check to make sure that I'm not misquoting the numbers here. If we look at visitation year to date so far, what we've seen year to date is actually a 12% increase in visitors by air, and that compares with a 7% increase in visitation by car. So even though the price of gas is at a more reasonable level than it was when it was up in the high $1.30, $1.40, but what we're also seeing is a really nice boost in visitation by air, which is really good because we know that people who arrive by air spend more when they're in the province.
Cars are up, but air arrivals are up.
Even more.
Okay.
Yes.
And ferry arrivals?
If I'm looking at the ferries, we look at all four ferries. North Sydney is up by 5% year to date. Digby is up by 6%. Year to date, arrivals, non-resident arrivals by Caribou are up by 20%. And I'm sorry, I have not applicable because I'm a bit of a nitpicker when I'm doing year-over-year comparisons. And the operating season for the Yarmouth Ferry was different. This year we had more days of operation, so doing a percent change to last year would be unfair because I'd be overinflating. But if I look at the comparable months, in the month of July, non-resident visitations coming in from Yarmouth were up by 19%. In August, they were up by 1%. And in September, they were up by 3%.
Okay. We might come back to that. So in terms of the, I do want to talk about the partnership, the collaborative kind of environment you referred to in your opening comments. So when I looked at the financial statements, I could see that for 2017, for March, the year ended March 2017, there are $2.9 million in professional fees and $2.4 million in grants and contributions. So on the face of it, it looks to me like we're spending more on professional fees than supporting initiatives in communities. So maybe we can talk about what is the 2.9 million in professional fees. Do we have a breakdown of that number?
Mr. Johnson?
The professional fees would include the funds in support of the agency of record activities. What we pay them in services, not the media buy, but the retainer fee, so that's professional services. Also our auditor costs is another example, but the DDB contract would be the major one.
What is the contract?
The agency of record.
Yeah, okay.
With DDB.
Okay, so that wouldn't be, so would somebody else describe that as advertising?
Well, I'll let you speak.
Ms. Saran?
Yes. Advertising is one component of what our agency does. They also manage projects for us. They help us with collateral. They work with us on creating a creative strategy. So it's a bit broader than just advertising.
Okay. So they're doing work that can't be provided by the staff.
No,
yeah.
It's very different. What our staff does, they manage our partnership programs. They create the strategy that we give to the agency to create the creative assets around. So it's very much a partnership, but. Our staff, the roles that they play are completely different than the roles our agency plays. We don't have the capacity in-house to produce the creative. That's the role of our agency. We don't have the capacity in-house nor the bulk buying power to manage the media buy. They've got because they're an international organization, they've got contacts around the world that they can give us that use their bulk buying power to get us the best possible prices on our media assets around the world.
Okay. Okay. The 2016-2017 accountability report It was in the package we were provided. It showed that less than a quarter of stakeholders expressed a high degree of confidence in Tourism Nova Scotia's ability to achieve its mandate. So less than a quarter of the stakeholders were confident that Tourism Nova Scotia could fulfill its mandate, and only a third expressed a high degree of satisfaction with Tourism Nova Scotia. So I did hear you talking about the collaborative nature and the partnerships and stuff, but it sounds like to this, on the flip side of that, maybe the partners are feeling that great about things. Is that, what would you say to that report?
I think a fair assessment would be looking at the figures, how they go up once the partners have the opportunity to sit down with Tourism Nova Scotia and learn what the assets are, what the programs are that they can leverage. This took a broad-based look at our partners across Nova Scotia, and quite a number of them have never attended a tie-ins convention, for example, or attended a Tourism Nova Scotia program. Once they have, we see the numbers go up. Also, this was a benchmark year, and we know exactly what we need to change. It gave us indicators of what we need to enhance in terms of putting information out there and teaching our partners what assets they can leverage. So it was a starting point for us. And is there room for us to grow? Absolutely. Yep.
So things will get better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but those would have been pretty disappointing, I'm sure, to like a quarter of the stakeholders expressing confidence is.
You want, Michael, you want to say something?
I'd be happy.
Oh, Anna. Okay, I'm sorry.
Ms. Moran.
Yeah, I would like to address that question because we've actually had quite a bit of discussion just in the last couple of days about how we set that that initial benchmark. And my opinion on that is that we set it too high for us to really be able to say, hey, are we doing well, are we not doing well? And what we're looking at doing is now looking at the people rating us as a 7, 8, 9, or 10. 8, 9, and 10 is a really high standard to meet, and that is absolutely our goal, is to get that 8, 9, and 10 up really high. When we include the 7s in there, we're looking at a significant minority of stakeholders assessing us as a 7, 8, 9, or 10 on both of those factors.
Well, okay. So it says that less than a quarter of the stakeholders have expressed a high degree of confidence in Tourism Nova Scotia's ability to achieve its mandate. So is the response that less than a quarter are at the high degree, which I guess you're describing as 8, yes. 9, and 10.
Yes.
And the rest of the people are below that.
That's correct.
So if you step down to instead of, are you saying instead of a high degree, what's the next one down, like some degree, or because the numbers will go up as you step down and say, well, maybe if you say a 5's okay, then maybe you're at 90% satisfaction, right? But I was struck by the high degree, and I take your point that maybe that is a high hurdle rate. But if these are the operators of the province, I would like to think they have a high degree of confidence in Tourism Nova Scotia to do their job, which is kind of what mandate is, right?
In our accountability report, we report on a small number of measures, and 2 of those are the confidence in Tourism Nova Scotia's ability to meet its mandate. The other is the satisfaction with Tourism Nova Scotia. We also assess several other pieces of information as part of that study. And one really important piece of information that really adds context to those seemingly low numbers offering assessments of 8, 9, or 10 is stakeholders' awareness of Tourism Nova Scotia's mandate. If you have a low level of awareness of our mandate, it makes you a little less able to assign a meaningful rating of our performance. And one of the things that the benchmark study showed, not surprisingly, because we are a very new organization and we really are still embarking on that outreach and education to really build and drive understanding and support for our mandate and our strategy. But what we discovered in the benchmark study is that awareness of our mandate and awareness of our strategy is quite low. So that's the context when I say I think 8 is too high. It's because we're starting from a fairly high lack of awareness of our mandate and strategy. So we should really be using that when we're evaluating how we're performing in terms of how our stakeholders perceive our performance.
Okay, thank you for that. So I have seen some references of Tourism Nova Scotia making references to like Airbnb and Uber. Where are we at? Where do we stand where does Tourism Nova Scotia stand in terms of Airbnb and Uber and other sharing services? Ms. Saran?
We've been so successful. Yes, sorry. We've been so successful in the past couple of years that our summer season, which is our high season in Nova Scotia, we're seeing a lot of compression, a lack of capacity, if you will, in our accommodations offering. We're also trying, part of our goal is to bring higher yield visitors to the province, ones that are going to stay longer and spend more. Those visitors are demanding high quality accommodations that we just don't have in abundance, particularly in the rural areas. We don't have a lot of people lining up to make investments in 5-star properties either. So consumer demand is such that they are the ones that are driving this use of the sharing economy platforms, things like Airbnb being the biggest of the group, but there's other entities like VRBO, things of that nature. Customers are driving the demand for this. We at Tourism Nova Scotia feel that this is an opportunity to leverage these platforms because they can give us the capacity that we need in the high season, but it can also give us the quality that we require. You see some of the products on these sites, you're getting beautiful 5-star type homes on the ocean, which is exactly the kind of presence we want to have in the minds of these higher yield visitors. So what we've been working with the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia, who understandably their members do have some concerns, particularly in the accommodation sector, because there's a perception that the playing field when it comes to tax and regulation is not equal. So that said, Minister McClellan has started a working group which brings together members of the tourism industry led by tie-ins, along with every entity, every government agency that touches the sharing economy, so they can weigh in on what their thoughts and concerns are on the issue. So we're very much involved in this. We're working closely with Airbnb. We at Tourism Nova Scotia feel that we would not be very good tourism marketers if we weren't looking at this platform as a way to leverage our messaging and our brand to the millions of eyeballs that are on that site every single day. We want to make sure there's consistency with our brand. We want to make sure that our product is out there. That's our goal.
Okay. So you're supportive of Airbnb?
I'm supportive of giving customers options and what kind of accommodations that they're demanding.
Sure. Yeah. Now, the working group that you referenced, has that already been struck?
It starts today, I believe, the first meeting. Mm-hmm.
Oh, do you happen to know what the constitution of that working group is, or what their mandate is?
It'll be tie-ins. There'll be representation from tie-ins, from the Hotel Association, from some of the major hotel properties in Nova Scotia. There'll be the Department of Finance, Municipal Affairs. Our chief economist, Fred Morley, will be there, who's been studying the sharing economy issue for the past year. So it'll be a diverse group of people around the table.
And are you on it?
Yes.
Okay. And it starts today, and do you know what the mandate is? Just to look, like to come up with a recommendation for government, I guess? Or?
The mandate was to provide the industry a forum where they could express their concerns about tax and regulation, explore best practices in other jurisdictions around the world and across the country to best leverage the sharing economy platform, because these aren't going away. How are we going to make this work for Nova Scotia in the best way possible? So it's to address the tax concerns, but also look at the opportunity from a marketing perspective with a view toward Tourism Nova Scotia leveraging those.
Okay. And do you expect that working group would ultimately make a recommendation on
yes.
policy? And did you have a kind of a time frame? Like, is it
the goal is that the work of the working group will wrap up by the end of March. That was what the goal that the minister set.
Thank you. And that would be all the sharing economy, Uber and all this type of stuff?
The focus of this particular working group is Airbnb and the accommodation platforms, not Uber or any of the others.
Okay.
At this time.
Okay, thank you. You referenced in your opening comments local policies and all levels of government. What's Tourism Nova Scotia's thoughts on the kind of the marketing levy that is in place in some areas of the province, but maybe not in others? Are you supportive of a marketing levy, or do you have a I'm
supportive of the municipalities, the areas that do have their marketing levy. It gives them the monies to advance their own individual organizations. We've done some studies around provincial-wide levies, and it was going to be too cumbersome to manage internally. It would involve taking the levies away from the ones that have existing levies in place and disseminating it back out again. It just didn't make sense financially for us. It would have taken the agreement of all the dozens of other municipalities that are out there that don't currently have levies in place to support a provincial initiative. That said, if there are processes in place, if municipalities such as your own, like Pictou, want a levy, there are processes in place where they can go about getting them.
So it's up to the individual, to those areas, I guess, to work with their own. Okay, that's fine. I don't know if you have any numbers to hand on the if the focus on China is working out. Is it too early to tell whether that's working yet, or?
We've only been in the China market for a year now, and because of our limited budget previously, we were leveraging the work that Destination Canada did. Destination Canada is the national brand. It's well known internationally. The Nova Scotia brand isn't known, so it very much made sense to dovetail on their efforts there. That said, our minister recently announced that we were getting another $500,000 in funding for China, which is starting this year, and we're going to use that money to hire an in-market representative that can move the needle immediately. They'll have established relationships with tour operators and travel agents. They'll be able to work closely with government, with friendship-type agreements in the provinces where they exist already, but basically have those relationships in place.
Order. Time has expired. We'll move to the NDP Caucus. Ms. Roberts, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up on one of Mr. Houston's earlier questions and try to understand how you judge the impact of marketing investment. Understandably, last year, like you say, perfect storm, and certainly I saw lots of references to the Trump bump in Cape Breton, and we had all kinds of great folks marketing for us through social media in ways that I think we couldn't have predicted, but were certainly welcome. But in general, is there some sort of understanding in the industry of what the payback is for marketing investment?
Ms. Saran?
Yep. It's very difficult to show correlations between marketing and visitation. That said, we do have a number of measures that we work with. We work closely with Destination Canada on constantly improving these members, with a goal being that eventually we'll have a national dashboard where we'll be able to have comparative analysis to other provinces. We're looking at all different types of projects where research will be getting better and better going forward. So we're excited about that. In terms of how we monitor our marketing now, there's a number of ways. I think one of the most compelling is the fact that our click-throughs to operators in the past 2 years on our with our current campaign, If You Only Knew, click-throughs to operators are up 40%. And this is incredibly compelling data, because that's taking a visitor right from our website, novascotia.com, to the operators that have the cash registers that are making the sale. So I think this is really great data. Also, we're able to determine how long people spend on novascotia.com. We're able to see the level of engagement. And in the past 2 years with our current campaign, we're seeing them dive more and more into the video content we have there. They're staying longer. They're viewing more pages. All of these things give us indications that the traffic and the visitation is going to go up accordingly. Anna, do you have anything to add on that? I'll pass it over to Anna.
Ms. Moran?
Thank you. One of the other measures that we use to assess our campaigns on an annual basis is organic search. And organic search is really a measure of how well we're driving interest in Nova Scotia as a vacation destination. And similar to the increases that Michele talked about in terms of visitor engagement and clicks through to operators, we also saw an increase in organic search. Some of the other things that
I'm sorry, organic search, does that mean somebody putting Nova Scotia into a Google search engine? Is that what that is? Or?
It is. It's when somebody uses a search engine like Google to search for a Nova Scotia vacation related term as opposed to a Bank of Nova Scotia or something like that. So it's a vacation related term, and then the click-through happens to novascotia.com. Now, in order to really facilitate that click-through to novascotia.com, one of the other activities that we spend quite a bit of time on is search engine optimization, so that when those vacation-related terms are put into a Google search, then we show up in that top 1, 2, or 3, and that would be unpaid as opposed to the search engine marketing, which would be paid. But as Michele said, it is really difficult to directly correlate what we do in advertising to direct visitation to Nova Scotia. So we do look for other measures to be able to assess our success. And she also said that we're continually working to improve how we're doing that. In 2017, we conducted a quantitative pre and post study on the campaign in our key markets of Ontario, Quebec, and Northeast US. And the results from that study, it was really exciting for 2 reasons. One reason is that the results really did tell us that the campaign generated foundational interest in Nova Scotia. That is, we now have people thinking about Nova Scotia as a vacation destination, but it also influenced visitors to come to Nova Scotia. So that was the first really exciting thing that we learned. But in addition to that, one of the things that we need to do, because as Michele said earlier, we've got kind of the perfect storm happening right now. We've got a low dollar, we've got a low price of gas. We've got other political conditions that are really making Canada an attractive vacation destination. So we're competing with a whole lot of other destinations to make people think of us and to have them remember us. And one of the things that our campaign scored above industry standards on was its ability to stand out from other tourism-related advertising campaigns. It also performed really well on appeal and on making the viewer interested in learning more about Nova Scotia.
Okay. Thank you. So I looked with interest at the SWOT analysis that you did of the tourism sector in Nova Scotia, and one of the threats that was mentioned was that without significant marketing investment, it would be hard to reach the $4 billion in tourism revenue. I guess 2 questions related to that. One is, given what you said about how it's hard to correlate investment to actual visits, is marketing investment the factor that's going to get us to $4 billion, given all the other factors in the market? But also, are you speaking there about your own marketing investment? Is there a threat that is it Nova Scotia, is it your agency that needs to do that investment, or are we talking about other agencies and the farmer's daughter advertising land for sale and, if Trump gets elected, move to Cape Breton, etc.?
Ms. Saran?
We're talking about investment in Tourism Nova Scotia's activities. Keep in mind that marketing investment isn't just what we deal with in terms of our agency. We also have sales efforts and in-market representatives in places like the UK. We're going to have one in China. We have one in Germany. We work with the Atlantic Canada Tourism Partnership. So it's much easier to show the needle move with sales efforts. We can see that tour operators are promoting Nova Scotia more. We can see them packaging more itineraries. We're able to see more easily a return on investment in the sales activities. again, we're working closely with Destination Canada on better measures going forward to get that national dashboard. We're going to be working with credit card companies going forward so we can get an actual a better handle on spend when they're coming here on a national basis. We're going to be able to see movements through aggregate cell phone data going forward. So these are all exciting projects that we're working on going forward that will give us a better indication of return on investment. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering like what the price tag is of I mean, obviously, a lot of what you're talking about is web-based advertising, which makes perfect sense. But are you also doing, you know, television, film, trailers, that sort of thing? And can you give me a price tag for what one initiative like that between, you know, shooting something and actually putting it on screens in front of people somewhere?
We have got out of a lot of the type of advertising that you're speaking of because it's not easily monitored in terms of ROI. We do have a TV campaign that we put in our target markets. We have, again, it's much less of our focus now going forward, but we're able to really focus more on specialty type advertising that will target the specific type of customer that would want to be predisposed to wanting to come to Nova Scotia now. So while we do still have a TV campaign, much more of our work is web-based where we can get those analytics from things like Google going forward. It just makes more sense. TV is great for broad-based appeal and brand awareness, and it'll probably always be part of our marketing mix, but in a much smaller way than it used to be.
Okay. Sometimes I think about the film Maudie, which was about Nova Scotia, but was filmed in Newfoundland.
Yes.
After the cutting of the film tax credit, and I think about the value of product placement in that film, where I think probably an opportunity was lost to some extent because the landscapes are Newfoundland. So you couldn't actually treat that as a product placement with, you know, shots of Peggy's Cove or the Lunenburg waterfront or any of those sort of iconic destinations actually in the film because it wasn't actually shot here. Speaking to some of the weaknesses, like you say, the market is quite compressed in the summertime. Like we're near capacity in the summertime. Yes. And of course there's, so you've got seasonal jobs, you've got, it doesn't make sense to invest in the sort of products that you want to have available because to get a return on investment with a 4-month season is very challenging. I'm wondering what you're hearing from operators in terms of where they see the future of their business. And again, actually going back to the film industry, I know that the film industry, when that activity was more prevalent, would lead to a great number of accommodation nights off-season when there actually was capacity in some of our hotels and motels and bed and breakfasts in different destinations around the province. So I'm wondering what you're hearing about the impact and the challenges facing those operators.
Our operators have probably never been happier than they are right now. Their summer season was fantastic. That said, they recognize that there's going to be challenges going forward. They know that we have a lofty goal of $4 billion in front of us. We've been very vocal in the need to build capacity in the shoulder season. And a lot of that, it requires a couple of things, one of which is a cultural shift. A lot of our operators only want to be in business in the summertime. Some view it as a hobby. They like to go off to Florida in the wintertime. So a lot of it's going to be convincing them that there is opportunity to be open in the shoulder and winter season. That said, what we're doing at Tourism Nova Scotia is working to build experiences that are going to motivate travel in those seasons. So creating opportunities where visitors are going to be able to see some type of advertising online or whatnot, where it's going to inspire them to book a trip now. So not just put it on their bucket list for later, they're going to see a product, something like Celtic Colors that has become so world-renowned. They can look at that product and think, I've got to go in October, thereby raising occupancies in the shoulder season, which is October. Great example of what can be done with a little bit of imagination. I was talking to my team earlier about a great example out in the West Coast, out in Vancouver Island. They used to do the same thing as Nova Scotia. They closed in the winter because they had horrible storms. Then one day one operator looked out and thought, you know, these storms are so dramatic. Why don't we market this to people that never get to see the ocean and the high tides and things like that? It was just looking at something in a different way. Now storm watching season on Vancouver Island is their high season. So it's, again, this is a great opportunity for Nova Scotia to look at what assets we have and how we can leverage them and give them that sex appeal that's going to appeal to visitors and get them to want to come in the off season. Thereby, when our operators see the opportunity, they're going to want to open and take advantage of the demand that we're helping to generate.
You talk about some tourism operators viewing their operations as a hobby.
Yes.
I mean, another constraint, as I understand it from your own analysis, is labor. And of course, most people who are looking for work are not looking for seasonal, low-waged work. What impact does it have on the sector that Nova Scotia currently has the lowest minimum wage in the country?
I can't really speak to the wages, but I know that labor is a big issue when it comes to the tourism industry. Students go back to school, and that's a big source for our operators, particularly accommodations and restaurants, to utilize. This is an issue that's known by the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia. They work closely with the colleges and universities, looking to give credit and that type of thing to students to stay longer, to adjust their offerings in terms of timing at the university so that they can stay in their jobs longer in the season. So it's definitely something that's on the radar of Tie-ins, who leads the initiatives on that.
What percentage of tourism revenues are actually as a result of Nova Scotians or Maritimers traveling in the province? And
I want to say it's 56%.
That around
65.
Do you mind if I?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Moran?
Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
When we develop our tourism revenues, we break it out into non-resident visitors. That would include other Atlantic provinces, and then we have it separated out into activities by Nova Scotians. And I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it would be low 50s for non-resident visitors, and then in the 40s for Nova Scotians. It's on our website, and I'm happy to pull it up and send it. But a significant minority of tourism revenues are currently generated by Nova Scotians.
So about half.
It would be, and I'll have to look it up. I think it's low, like mid-40s, mid-50s, yes.
And how would you actually capture, I mean, I think about my own family, when we travel around, often we're staying with friends but eating at restaurants. Yes. So how do you actually capture that our spending is that tourism, or is that just, revenue and nobody knows really? How do you classify it, or how do you capture that?
Thank you for that question. When we develop tourism revenues, a really important thing to remember is that tourism revenues are based on visitor-reported spending. And there's a number of tools that are used to develop those estimates. For Nova Scotians, for spending by Nova Scotians within Nova Scotia, Statistics Canada has a survey called the Travel Survey of Residents of Canada, and it is tied to right now the labor force survey. So when you get a call, a mandatory survey call to complete the labor force survey, you may also be asked to complete the Travel Survey of Residents of Canada. That Nova Scotia and reported spending is used to develop the estimates of spending by Nova Scotians within Nova Scotia. For non-resident visitors, Tourism Nova Scotia administers a visitor exit survey, and it is modeled on the Statistics Canada survey, whereby we intercept visitors as they are leaving the province and we direct them to exitns.ca to complete the Tourism Nova Scotia visitor exit survey.
So there isn't that fine grain where you don't necessarily know exactly what portion of revenues for example, restaurants in Lunenburg or whatever.
We do, yep. Yeah, we do. We link in the visitor exit survey to our visitor enumeration, so we are actually able to break out tourism revenues by sector, so transportation, accommodations, travel to and from the province, accommodations, etc. And we are also able to break it out by the region in the province in which the tourism revenues are then allocated.
Okay, thank you. Another question just in terms of your own reporting of things. There's different categories for tourism revenues, 3 of which are related to transportation. There's vehicle operation and transportation, and then rental and local transportation. I understand rental and local transportation, but what's transportation and vehicle operation? What's the difference between those two?
Yes, and thank you. That is a reminder for me to do better labeling on our charts. Transportation is transportation to the province. So when somebody is paying to come here, be it by air or rail or ferry, they spend a certain amount of money, and there's a need to allocate what is being spent on transportation to a region. So for example, I'm going to take us out of Nova Scotia. If somebody flies from London, England to Toronto, and they don't fly anywhere else in Canada, 1/2 of their air transport is allocated to Canada as tourism revenue for Canada, and then specifically it's allocated to Ontario, and then the other 50% is not. And if in England there would be a travel by England residents outbound, that 50% of that airfare would be allocated to that outbound tourism expenditures. So a portion,
but it doesn't necessarily generate any actual revenue in terms of tax revenue for Nova Scotia. Like I assume, like if you're buying
it does, because when you fly in to Nova Scotia, you're flying into an airport, and there are staff at the airport, and there are crews that are based in Halifax, and there are supplies that are purchased for the aircraft in Halifax. So it does have direct and indirect economic benefit. When because air travel to generates less economic impact than the direct spending in Nova Scotia. When we talk about spending in Nova Scotia, we tend to exclude the travel part, and we tend to talk about the money actually coming out of people's pockets right in Nova Scotia. So your second one was, what is the vehicle operation? That would be buying gas and oil and windshield washer fluid, those sorts of supplies for your vehicle while you're driving around the province.
Okay. So the $4 billion in tourism revenue.
Order. Time has just expired. We're going to move to the Liberal Caucus, and Mr. Michele.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, welcome. It's exciting to hear all this good news that's happening in tourism for our province, and as we follow on from the Ivany report and its recommendations, I'm glad to see that Tourism Nova Scotia is working with Tyans and the others to accomplish this goal. I want to go back to your opening remarks. You mentioned that you're being recognized by other jurisdictions for the work you're doing. Could you tell us more about that?
Ms. Saran?
We've had colleagues from across Canada reach out to learn more about our investment strategy and our partnership model. We've had Travel Alberta, Whistler, BC, Ontario. They've all reached out and they're looking at us at a best practice, so that's quite gratifying. We've also had our manager of experience development, Heather Yule, recently give a presentation at the request of Scotland's Tourism Board, where she talked about our experience development program and how we're working with industry to create those experiences that will compel people to come on a visit to Nova Scotia right now. Iceland has recently contacted us for information on how we market, so that was gratifying. Our friends at the Moran Institute of Sustainable Tourism, they do experience development training, and they've used our dining on the ocean floor as a case study of what can be done. And that is such a great success story. That dining on the ocean floor was conceived at Tourism Nova Scotia. We tested it with our target audience, and it held such appeal that we went out to industry and said, who can deliver on this? And the Flying Aprons stepped up, and now it's doing so incredibly well. We have 700 people on a wait list for next year. They're paying $400 a couple to go to this experience. So this inspires the rest of Nova Scotians to up their game, and wow, if they can do it, maybe I can charge more for a similar type of experience. So we find it's been quite compelling for the rest of Nova Scotians and gets them to up their game.
Thank you. I love that story about dining on the ocean floor, 700 people at $400, and that it reminds me of I guess a short story that your vice chair, I think, Mr. Thompson, who's with us today, shared with me this summer that, well, we certainly welcome the Pee Wee hockey team from Moncton coming over to Pugwash for a tournament. We really do need to, if we're going to get to $4 billion, we have to attract those who are going to spend a lot of money while they're here and spend it on those special experiences that we're creating that can generate high revenues for us. I've read with interest since it's released your 5-year strategic plan. I believe it came out before Christmas. And did this change in any ways fundamentally the strategy that you had at Tourism Nova Scotia, say, since 2015 to 2017?
No, our strategy hasn't changed. We're staying the course with our strategy because it's working. The content and the analysis you see there is based on research. And we know that to see substantial growth, we have to keep working on attracting non-resident overnight visitors that are higher spending first-time visitors. Now, all visitors are important, but we know that the first-time visitors, they're the ones that are most likely to be compelled to come to Nova Scotia based on advertising alone. And we know that's the wheelhouse we can play in, because as I think I said before, that once they come to Nova Scotia, odds are that they're going to come again and again because they're taken care of so well by our operators when they're here. So Tourism Nova Scotia focuses on those first-time visitors, those higher spending visitors, and the further away you come, the more you spend. So if you're coming by air from our target markets in Germany and the UK, you're going to be spending more money. In fact, you're probably spending 3 times as much money as a local when they come and stay with friends and relatives. So we're very clear in our strategic plan that everyone's got a role to play. When you have limited resources, it makes good sense not to be redundant. So we've clearly laid out who does what in that plan. It's not just our job at Tourism Nova Scotia to reach that $4 billion. It's an industry goal. And we see ourselves as, being the rallying cry, getting everybody on board and working together, being clear on that role clarity, and really educating them on what type of visitors we should be going after. We base our target markets on psychographics, not demographics. So we're not looking at a male over 50 necessarily. We're looking at people's psychographics, and that is which people are predisposed to like what we have to offer. And those are people that want authentic experiences, that like to do cultural immersion type things. People that go to Disney World or Las Vegas probably wouldn't be predisposed to love what we have here. So why would we market to them? Let's focus our time and effort on those types of individuals that are going to love what we have in Nova Scotia. So we're really helping the industry to be laser focused on where we're going to get the most bang for our buck quickly. in essence, what the strategy does is it just puts meat on the bones of the original content that came out in 2015, shows you what the situational analysis was that informed our decision making when we created that strategy, and also provides our industry with forecasting information so that they'll have a sense of if things are following the current trajectory, where we can expect visitation to go. So it's just to give them just a sense of the future based on our research.
Thank you for that. When we think of an audacious goal like doubling our tourism revenues, we recognize that we can't do the same thing the same old way, and that there's going to be game changers. And I would suggest that you've already spoken of one with the shared economy. What are some of the other game changers that you believe will have to come into play in order for us to reach our goal?
Well, you have to give people a way to get to Nova Scotia, and so air access is absolutely critical. The people that, as I said, that are coming from our target markets in the UK and Germany and the US, they need to have a way to get here. Air access is, we have the ferry, which is fantastic to get the people from the Northeast US, but we also need to give them options, and air is obviously critical when you're coming from overseas. An air access fund would be absolutely outstanding, because air carriers don't just decide we're going to come to Nova Scotia because it's a nice place to be. It's insanely competitive. We have to compete against other locations to get the carriers to consider Nova Scotia. So there's incentives that are put on the table, and this is just the way the game is played right now. It can be an airport waiving landing fees, for example, but they're also looking at, they're very risk-averse airlines. They very rarely make profits in the first couple of years, so they want guarantees that if their loads aren't running at 100%, that if, say, they're running at 50, they want to guarantee that the rest of they're covered, their risk is mitigated. So an air access fund would help us be in the game when we're competing against, say, a US destination for a carrier from, say, Frankfurt. It's critical. So that would be an absolute game changer for us. We see that when we get a new flight in from a target market, we see the economic impact immediately. I believe, Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had, when we got the flight from the UK recently, we saw the immediate economic impact of, I believe it was $10 million right off the bat. So you can't argue with these numbers. You're giving people a way to get here. Couple that with marketing that's already in place in those areas, partnerships with the air carriers to promote the destination, it's really a win-win. We're also seeing, as I said earlier, we're seeing strong growth in the summer season, and it's getting difficult to find accommodation. So we have to look at things like the sharing economy to give people places to stay. I need to look at leveraging those platforms. There's millions of eyeballs on those platforms every single day. Let's make sure our brand is consistent and clean. And so working with them offers a great opportunity and it's a game changer. We need to stay focused on consumer travel trends, and we need to continue to innovate. Who knows what the next platform will be or what customers are going to want going forward, but we have to be nimble as an organization. We need to be nimble as an industry to respond to what is hot, what are people looking for. And consistent marketing investments going forward. You can't go in and out of the market. You have to be consistent with your presence there in terms of sales, in terms of marketing. There's a great example in Colorado when the government there thought that, you know what, Colorado, everybody knows about it. It's #1 ski destination. We don't need to fund the tourism effort anymore. They found out how bad it can be when you don't fund it. They went from #1 to 17th in just over a year in terms of appeal, and it took years to rebuild that market share again. So we know that tourism marketing is very meaningful.
Good. Well, I understand that you'll be building on tourism marketing by attracting the largest tourism business development conference in Canada. It's going to take place in Halifax this year. Rendezvous Canada, I believe it's called. Could you expand on that? Tell us a bit about it.
Sure. We are so excited to have this. Canada's largest tourism business event is Rendezvous Canada. It takes place in Halifax from May 13th to 16th at the new Halifax Convention Centre. The last time it was in Nova Scotia in Halifax was was 2002, and we haven't been able to host it since then because the program grew so big it didn't fit into our existing convention center. So this is an incredible opportunity. We're going to have 1,800 tourism professionals. That's going to be 500 tour operators and travel agents from over 20 countries that are going to be descending on Halifax. They're going to have sales meetings, so it's timed one-on-one appointments during the day, and then they get a first-hand account of Halifax and Nova Scotia the rest of the time they're here. Tourism Nova Scotia is going to be hosting familiarization tours of the province, both pre and post the conference, to give them a real taste of not only what we have in Halifax, what we have from Yarmouth all the way up to Cape Breton. So it's a great opportunity. The event is going to provide immediate economic impact of $5.5 million to our economy. But that's just the starting point. These people are coming and seeing what they see in Nova Scotia. They're going to be inspired to create itineraries and package Nova Scotia going forward. So it's going to pay dividends for years into the future with these tour operators having these itineraries to sell to their clients in whatever countries that they may come from. This is the second of two great opportunities. In September, we had Go Media, which is a travel media marketplace that we were able to host. And we had 300 travel media from around the world descend on Nova Scotia. And they went back and they wrote stories. We had influencers here. We were able to really showcase what we have to offer in the province. So these are two amazing opportunities. And we're lucky now we have a convention center that's big enough to host these types of things.
Well, I'm looking forward to taking in some of that, and certainly looking forward to many of those rendezvous visitors coming down and visiting beautiful Chester St. Margaret's. The accomplishments seem very good. The plans seem great. I'm just wondering, as you look back on 2017, what, as an organization, what are you most proud of?
2017 was just an outstanding year. I was so impressed at really how our industry is aligning behind our strategy and starting to really embrace their roles. Businesses are thinking outside the box, they're innovating. They're really starting to grasp what it takes to become a wow experience. They're realizing we're not just competing with New Brunswick or PEI, we're competing with the world right now, and that's a platform we want to be on. We don't just want to compete with other Canadian destinations, we want to compete with everybody. And it's very easy to be in the tourism game now. If anyone can post something on social media and post a beautiful picture and inspire people to want to go. So we have to be very thoughtful and we have to be very strategic. So I really see our industry rallying behind, so I'm excited about that. I'm also very proud of my team at Tourism Nova Scotia. We've got the best group of people imaginable, and they're really working to achieve our vision as an organization of being the best in the world. They're passionate and they work hard every day for all Nova Scotians. I'm thrilled with how our marketing campaign has performed in 2017. We know that it stood out and it really built that foundational interest in Nova Scotia as a vacation destination. There was a lot of great things that happened, but the proof's in the pudding, and when we see our final numbers next month, I'm pretty sure we're going to get that $2.7 billion.
Excellent. In the strategic plan, as my colleague from Halifax Needham mentioned, you have a SWOT analysis in here: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And one of the weaknesses mentioned was aging infrastructure, primarily outside of Halifax, as a deterrent to visitation. Our government committed $2 million towards aging, or to redevelopment of infrastructure at iconic tourism sites in the province. I'm wondering if you could speak to that, where that program stands now and where you see it going in the years ahead.
Certainly. We call it the TRIP program, Tourism Revitalization Icon Program. We love acronyms in tourism. It's currently being managed by the Department of Business, and that's where the budget sits. We expect that the project will be handed over to Tourism Nova Scotia the next fiscal, but it's an exciting project. We're going to have more information released to the public in the very near future. It's going to create a program for existing tourism icons. The idea being that we will work to create world-class experiences leveraging those icons. So we know that Peggy's Cove is a tourism icon, obviously, but are we leveraging it to the best of its ability? People go, they take a beautiful photo by the lighthouse. What more could we be doing to generate revenue? Because it's all about the numbers. So I think this will give us an opportunity to work with key partners that are deemed icons to really help them up their game and get the most benefit and bang for the buck that we can out of these. But as I said, more details on the program will be forthcoming.
I certainly appreciate the reference to Peggy's Cove, which is in my constituency, and it's true. We'll have 70 tour buses a week rolling in there, and folks jump off the bus. They take a picture of that beautiful lighthouse, one of Canada's most known symbols, and then they look around and say, what else do we do? And there's some artisan shops and so forth, a couple food stops, but there's nothing really to keep them there. So I'll look forward to further discussions on this subject. Which brings me back to investments by government and by Tourism Nova Scotia and the importance of leveraging with the private sector. And I'd like to know if you could expand perhaps on what you're doing to attract private sector investment in the tourism sector in Nova Scotia.
We are not in the business of attracting investment per se, but what we do is we work closely with businesses to help them up their game. We have a business development unit that sits down and works with both new and existing businesses to make them understand through research who the visitors are, what visitors are demanding, and how best to go after the markets where there is an interest. So we work closely with them. We have 3 major partnership programs, one of which is our Inspiring Content program. And the idea being, we looked at the assets we had at Tourism Nova Scotia and we realized we didn't have a lot of consistency in terms of tone and style. We needed a lot of images from different parts of the province. Some were dated. We knew if our assets were like that, our partners probably would be too. So in an effort to get consistency and more bang for our marketing buck, we would put in $1 and the partner would put in $1. So if your destination, Cape Breton, for example, and you wanted more beautiful pictures of the Cabot Trail, you would come in with, I want to do this, these are the assets I need, this is the investment I can make, and we would match that. So together we would get much more assets than we could have got individually. We ensured brand consistency and tone. We also have a digital marketing program. This provides coaching to our industry. Some of them might not have the acumen that they need to fully leverage things like search engine marketing. Some of them might need assistance in YouTube or wanted to know more about social media and how to market in those forums. So we would sit down and provide the coaching, but we would also cost share. So we can buy more terms in search engine marketing if we work collectively together. The program's been a big success. It's not all just putting money into programs too. A lot of it is through our accelerator program is coaching. Like I gave the dining on the ocean floor example earlier. We want to get people to book Nova Scotia now, create those destinations that have sex appeal that people are excited about right now. So things like dining on the ocean floor, we tested the experience ahead of time, and we know that it's going to be compelling to visitors that are going to want to come. We work with the private sector operator, we help provide them with assets going forward, and it's constant business coaching as we go along. We have the assets to market them, and we work together and they provide the experience.
Okay, thank you. You've mentioned the new convention centre. What will the impact of that be for tourism here?
It's going to be a fantastic impact. I understand it's already sold out for 2018. We're able to go after meetings and conventions that we didn't have the capacity to host in the previous centre. The great thing is the tie between trade and the meetings industry. We can go after conventions where Nova Scotia is seen as a centre of excellence. For example, in oceanography, we know that we excel in this area. We can pursue conventions where we can demonstrate that we're thought leaders in this area, and we can have experts in this area come and leave their best practices and knowledge here. So it's
time has expired. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, I could go on forever on this topic.
Back to the PC Caucus, Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of, I was listening to the, the laser focus and on decision making and stuff, and I was wondering about the process to evaluate the impact of decisions. Like, if we decide to do this, what's the return on that? If we decide to do this, what's the return on that decision? So, I am curious about. If you mentioned airfare, like if we could work some kind of a deal there, have you done some analysis that says if we were to invest this amount, that would attract this number of visitors? Have you done that kind of analysis? Saran?
Yes, we do constant analysis based on market, based on spend. There's been a comprehensive study done twice now with the Halifax International Airport and the Department of Business through Intervistas Consulting that analyzes the impact of getting different carriers from different areas to come into Nova Scotia. We know that we can estimate the number of visitors that it will bring and the spend that it will provide. We can also look at whether there's cargo opportunities with those routes too. So it isn't just about tourism, it's about trade as well.
So what would the return be on, like, well, I guess two questions. Is there a specific ask for more money to initiate that program or improve that type of a program? And then B, what could you say, well, if we invest $100,000, this is the likely impact of that?
There is a specific ask through the Department of Business for an air access fund as well as a marketing fund, because you can't just go after the routes, you have to be able to market the region at the same time. So it's a twofold type thing. You can't have one without the other. So both of those things are in the budget ask for 2018. In terms of, I don't have the numbers in front of me, unfortunately.
How much would the ask be for the air access fund specifically?
2.5, the air access fund is 2.5 million, and I believe it's the same amount for the marketing ask to support.
So that's a significant undertaking then.
It's
and do you have? Could you share with us, like, that 5 million? How much return can we get from that you would expect?
We have that one case.
We have one example.
Yep, I'll pass it over to Anna.
Ms. Moran?
We, Tourism Nova Scotia, do not have that information on hand. There were 2 reports that were commissioned by Intervistas, and they do analysis. It really, and I'm going from memory here, but it depends on the origin of the flight. It depends on who's already running.
But it's some multiple. Invest 5 million, get more than 5 million back.
It's a good, I don't know the multiple. I can tell you it's a good multiple in terms of impact.
Okay.
The one example that we have that I'm sorry doesn't directly answer your question, but does give an idea of the impact of when a route opens, and that would be in 2015 when the new route opened up between Glasgow and Halifax. And what we saw there was an increase in visitation from the UK of 46% year over year, about 10,000. Incremental visitors from the UK in the first year of operation. And if you think that those 10,000 visitors each spent about $1,000 in Nova Scotia, that's a tremendous amount of tourism spending in the province from one single flight.
Okay. So this would be a real boost to the air access market, and presumably you compare and contrast that with other opportunities. Keep going. Okay, sorry. So, for example, how much did we spend on the Yarmouth Ferry last year? And would that be a kind of would you know the multiplier for that when you're making these kind of decisions? Ms. Saran?
We know that visitors arriving by the Yarmouth Ferry are the highest yield visitors that are coming to the province. They're spending about $2,100 per visitor, and air, I want to say it's about $1,400 on average per visitor. So while the number of visitors is significantly smaller coming by the ferry, the yield is significant. Our role at Tourism Nova Scotia is we want to give visitors a variety of access options and access points. So we want all access that we can get.
So would the analysis that you would do strictly from a a tourism viewpoint be take the number of arrivals on the ferry, times that by $2,100. That's the economic impact to our province, and then
from a tourism perspective,
and then compare that to the cost, and then you'd be determining if there's a multiplier, what that multiplier is.
Yes.
Okay. And just do you have the number to hand as to how many visitors there were this year on the?
I do. Let me.
Ms. Moran?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I do. Let me just look it up here. Sorry. It was about 17,000 visitors came in via the
for the season,
via the Yarmouth Ferry for the season. Non-resident overnight, yes. Yeah. And the important thing to keep in mind when I say 17,000, I need to make a note on how we actually do our visitor enumeration. When we do visitor enumeration, we're looking at visitors who are coming into the province only. So we're not looking at visitors who are then leaving the province. So I'm underestimating, when I'm looking at the Yarmouth visitation, I'm actually underestimating the total number of visitors who came in to Nova Scotia who used the Yarmouth Ferry because our visitor enumeration model is to look at how many non-resident visitors overall came into Nova Scotia, and we happen to have a number of different entry points.
Okay.
So that 17,000 would be non-resident visitors who entered the province via the Yarmouth Ferry. There would be a number of visitors who came in through Amherst or who came in through Digby, who then left and used the ferry leaving. But Bay Ferries would need to be able to provide you with that entire number. So
do you have a sense as to whether it's a better investment, a more return on investment to invest in the air or the ferry or the I guess driving traffic, or I know that you indicated that a ferry visitor would spend $2,100 versus $1,400, so on the yield it seems to be higher, but the initial investments are different. So do you have a sense as to where is the best bang for buck?
When we look at any access point, any route coming into Nova Scotia, what we're really looking at is the overall tourism impact. So when we look at the Yarmouth Ferry and the impact, one of the things that we absolutely have to look at is the impact on the region where the ferry operates. And that would be the Yarmouth and Acadian Shores region. And one of the things that we saw in 2014, which would have been the year that the ferry started operating again, is we saw a significant bump in room nights sold in the Yarmouth area. And if we then go forward to 2017, and if we're looking at that June to September period when the ferry operates, we've seen an increase in room nights sold of 53% in that region. And that in and of itself is really important because it's revitalized that region. Mm-hmm. And what that then does is it makes investment in that region to develop the kinds of experiences that will drive visitation to Nova Scotia that much more attractive. So when we're looking at Yarmouth, we're looking at it as a region in the province that is now thriving as a tourism destination because of the ferry.
I don't dispute that. I guess what I'm more interested in is there's a cost to that revitalization. There's maybe other ways it could have been done. Maybe there's an airport there, right? So maybe some kind of air, but I just wondered if those analyses were done, but it doesn't sound like it's something that was done.
That wouldn't be analysis that Tourism Nova Scotia would be doing.
Okay, fair enough. So I do want to talk about I want to finish off on the Airbnb thing. So you mentioned Fred Morley is involved in that. Did he do a study already? Did Mr. Morley already complete a study on Airbnb? So I seem to remember that he was kind of commissioned to do a study, but I don't remember seeing the study. Are you aware if it was completed?
Ms. Saran?
It isn't a study. It's on secondment to Tourism Nova Scotia to help us inform our decision-making and study the sharing economy and the opportunity presented by the platforms. But there was never to be a study or white paper release.
Okay. So, and he's been doing that for roughly a year now?
Yes.
Okay. But there's no recommendations that have come out of that yet?
we've had significant recommendations, which has led to the working group for the industry. We've analyzed what industry perception is of the sharing economy platforms, and also what the opportunity is presented by them from a marketing perspective, which has led to the working group that will start today to look at creating a more level playing field in terms of tax and regulation.
So the recommendations that have made and are presumably on the table internally, can you share those recommendations with us? Is that maybe not today, but is that something that you would share with the committee? So the working group is going to assess the recommendations that have been made.
It's going to assess what the industry wants and needs in terms of leveling the playing field. So that's less about Tourism Nova Scotia and more about things like hoteliers and B&Bs and how we can make things more equitable for them. What we can share going forward in the future is if we do enter into some kind of marketing arrangement or agreement with the sharing platforms, we can certainly share that going forward. It'll be very much about brand awareness and making sure that we've got Nova Scotia assets front and center in front of those millions of eyeballs on the platforms.
Okay. The $500,000 request for the Chinese markets, that's an ask, or is that?
No, we have it in our budget.
Okay, so you have that. So do you have an expectation of what kind of multiplier that might produce?
We are just brand new in the market. We're going to need to start benchmarking it. We are just in the process of finalizing the hiring of an in-market rep. And so that person will be charged with creating a formal strategy for China going forward. We will start to work with tour operators and then again setting benchmarks. Where are we now with Chinese inbound and where are we going? So I think it's too early to establish those
So
things.
would they work with the existing agency?
They will work with our agency, yes. They will work with the Destination Canada individuals that are present in Beijing already, and we will be leading them from our offices here in Nova Scotia.
So is that a distinct difference between like other agencies that could have did this in-house already and we're choosing two providers where one existed, or how does that, I just don't really know how that, are they different things? They might be different things.
We hire in-market representatives because they're specialists in the area they're in. They're immersed in the culture. They speak the language. They have established relationships with tour operators and media outlets. They're experts in social media platforms in China that we're not. They're bringing to us the expertise that we don't have in-house. We'll be managing them and explaining the product and the strategy we have at Tourism Nova Scotia. They will work with us on tactical activations around that.
Yeah, so that's a skill set that doesn't exist in-house.
No.
And it doesn't exist at the agency that you're already working with.
No.
Okay, but are there some agencies that would do that in-market stuff too, or are they different skill sets?
Sorry. DDB, if you're referring to our agency of record, they would provide the marketing assets, but they wouldn't necessarily be experts in specific markets. So they would work with our in-market. We would work with our in-market representative. They would explain to us what types of things resonate with the clients in those markets, and our agency would help to build those assets that would help us pursue those markets. Okay.
So in terms of the segments, so you're focusing on 3 segments: free spirits, cultural explorers, and authentic experiences.
Yes.
You've selected those segments through a process, which we're not going to have time to talk about today, but I did want to ask about, there is another segment, which is the largest one, and it's called gentle explorers. Not worthy of focusing on? It's not in your top 3 anyway. Maybe you can say why that wouldn't be a big focus area for us.
I'm going to turn this over to my expert on the segments, Anna Moran.
Ms. Moran.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Gentle explorers you're right. They're a large segment, and they make up a not insignificant portion of the non-resident visitor population. Segmentation is all about honing in and deciding when you have limited resources where you're going to make the most difference. So who are you most likely to be able to influence to come to Nova Scotia? Gentle explorers were not selected as a target for marketing because they're more likely than other segments to be influenced by friends and family as opposed to be influenced by Tourism Nova Scotia marketing efforts.
Order. Time has expired. We'll move to the NDP Caucus and the Honourable Dave Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I just want to, I have a couple kind of quick questions on things, but I just want to go back a little bit to the what you mentioned around the Chinese market, an addition or $500,000. Is that in addition to previous budget, or is that a new line item, new program initiative that you'll be unfolding over the next year?
Ms. Saran?
I'm sorry. It's new money. It's additional to the existing budget. Yeah.
Okay. We know a lot of buzz around Destination Cape Breton and some of the work they've done and the recognition, especially with a bit of satire, but it drove especially a lot of Americans to their site, and I think they're doing well. What kind of relationship, what support do you have for Destination Cape Breton, or what do you give to them to try to hopefully continue this trend on with hopefully an increase in visitation to the island, which is a visitation to Nova Scotia, but specifically to Cape Breton Island?
We work closely with all the regional marketing organizations in the province. Yes, Cape Breton did a fantastic job last year. They were very nimble to jump onto the Trump bump opportunity. It was very impressive. We worked closely with them, as we do with other regional organizations, through our partnership programs. We work with them on creating the assets to make sure that our video and imagery is consistent and brand compliant. So we have a consistent look and feel in our marketing materials. We work with them on search engine optimization. They actually are our biggest investor in our partnership programs. So the relationship is outstanding.
No, it's interesting to see one comment, put it out there, and I don't think it cost a heck of a lot of money to do what they did, and hopefully we'll continue to see an increase in support for that area of the province. Eastern Seaboard, Atlantic Coast. You mentioned earlier that the environment now with the low dollar, gas prices low. To me, the Eastern Seaboard is 100 million plus people in the U.S. 35% of the population is on the Eastern Seaboard. So, to what degree and to what amount of money are we marketing on the Eastern Seaboard of the U.S.?
The Eastern Seaboard is our biggest market in the U.S., that being the northeastern part, predominantly the Boston, New York region, Hartford, and down into the Mid-Atlantic. We do co-marketing with our sister Atlantic Canadian provinces through the Atlantic Canada Agreement on Tourism, so there's investment made there too. So we have a twofold approach. There's Atlantic Canada messaging in the market, as well as Nova Scotia messaging, so they leverage each other quite nicely. Yes, they are our biggest markets. So they're our highest yield U.S. markets.
Are you able to put a dollar figure on what is spent in that market? I mean, I know you have now $500,000 for the Chinese market. Could you give us?
I don't have the figures with me right here now.
You can, as long as you provide the committee.
Yep.
That's I'm
certainly. Yep.
Excellent. So you mentioned, it's interesting, it kind of leads into an area. I know there's a lot of costs that Tourism Nova Scotia have no control over, but does have an impact, I think, on tourism, on when people choose to come to our province. Just last week, we had Highway 104, the Cobequid Pass, talking about tolls. And, the current government said that, tolls, once the bonds are paid off, will come off for Nova Scotia motorists, but there wasn't a strong commitment to ensure that they come off for non-residents. I would assume that would have an impact potentially on visitation. Do we still have counters at Amherst in the little lighthouse that we have there? That's my first question.
We do.
That's great. And do you think that will have an impact do you feel that you have a role maybe to advise government that, listen, if we're involved in this Atlantic marketing tool to the Eastern Seaboard, I would think it wouldn't be a good thing for us to be the only province that has a potentially cost to come into the province to use our roads. I mean, I could see the ads now in New Brunswick. Come to New Brunswick, stay in New Brunswick, we won't charge you to use our roads, right? So do you have a role as the government will make that decision over the next year or so? And should you have a role to maybe advise the government that, listen, that could impact visitation in Nova Scotia if tourists, non-residents have to be charged to use our road to enter the province?
It's not an issue that's been brought to my attention. I haven't seen complaints on that front from customers. If it was, I would certainly step up and express a concern, but we haven't seen any complaints on that area.
Well, no, I mean, everybody's being charged.
Yeah.
A year from now, we could be in a position where non-Nova Scotians would be charged. So that's, as long as it's on your radar, I feel you should have a role in it. I mean, if the government's going to go out and say, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to move forward? I would think it would be a negative thing. Maybe it might not deter someone from coming here, but it might. And for your aggressive agenda, I think you need to make sure that all the players know that there are impacts when there are things are like cost of a toll road. So I hope it is on your radar and that you engage with the government to say, you know, this could have an impact on us reaching our goals over the next number of years. The other area also, and it's not a big cost, but January 1st, we've seen an airport improvement fee increase at the airport. Does that play a role? I know you talked about carriers and trying to reduce costs for carriers to come into the province and making sure that we're attractive. Do those fees, is that the same for travelers, individual travelers? Would that deter people from coming, I think, if we continue to see increases in terminal airport fees, or is it something that's not talked about, not complained about? People don't really look at that. Any opinion or comment on that?
I think those types of fees are becoming par for the course for airport improvements now. I haven't heard anything specific, any negativity around it personally. And those are the types of things that with air access funds and when we go after certain carriers that can be waived to get carriers to come into Halifax Airport.
Okay. Would you down the road potentially comment on, do you feel that's a role of Tourism Nova Scotia to look at impacts and costs that you would say, listen, you know, okay, we've seen a lot of upgrades at the airport. I mean, it's I think definitely over the last number of years we've seen an increase in what people see when they come to the province, which is has a huge impact, I think. But do you feel that would be a role if you see those costs continue to increase, that potentially Tourism Nova Scotia would say, listen, you know, that impacts visitors to our province. So,
if our visitors were highlighting it as a concern, we would absolutely bring it up.
Okay. Excellent. I don't know if it came up during the budget estimates. I know it's through business, your Crown Corpus through the business, but just we were looking through the budget line items for Tourism Nova Scotia. And I'm just a little curious around the annual deficit and what that is all about. It's I'm looking at the. You probably don't have your financial pages in front of you, but on page 5 of the Tourism Nova Scotia Statement of Operations, at the bottom has an annual deficit, cumulative deficit beginning of the year 1.2 million, accumulated deficit at the end of the year 1.2 million, no change. Could you maybe elaborate on what that deficit is for, why it's on the books? I'm
going to turn this over to my Chief Operating Officer, Michael Johnson.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to Public Accounts.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question. And so when we became a Crown Corporation, we became an outside agency of government. And what that deficit figure is related to is that there was a pension and health obligation that came over to Tourism Nova Scotia. And the government, in the case of the pension obligation, the government covered that cost. In the case of the health obligation, which is roughly that figure, that came over to Nova Scotia, so that's on our books showing a deficit, and that will continue to be carried forward. But that's what it's related to. The total between the health obligation and the pension obligation was just over $2 million. And so that was just the initial transition that year, and going forward, that's why the number's the same. So it's now not an issue for us, but that accumulated deficit will continue to carry it forward on the books.
So will that be indefinite? I mean, I'm not the accountant. I'm going to look at my colleague here for some assistance. But so that you know, this year's budget, when we come in back in the legislature in March or April, we'll see that figure continue to be the same.
Carry forward. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we'll have more questions then on why would it continue to carry forward. It's yeah. Okay. What do you see as? And I know it's been quite successful the last couple of years in tourism, and we're glad to see that. It's you know, especially seasonal operations when they can see the room rates for hotels, for example, at high numbers, and it's a success. What are the challenges we have in operators and tourism services and companies have over in front of us that we need to work on to try to overcome? Are there hurdles? Are there things that we need to be looking for to try to get past? And I think tourism for all MLAs is something that we all want to see achieve high numbers and want to see continue to grow. I know when I first entered the legislature some 14, almost 15 years ago, tourism, I remember at the time Rodney McDonald was the minister, was let's double the tourism number, and so it's always, I think, been a priority for every government, all political stripes, to try to increase visitation to our province and what we have to offer, and I think we're all advocates when we leave the province on trying to encourage people to come back here. So what are the challenges that we have in front of us over the next couple of years, for example? I know we talk a lot about all the success, but there are challenges. Could you just maybe outline some of those?
Ms. Saran?
Well, we talked earlier about the capacity issues. We've done so well that there's not a lot of places for people to stay. So we need more investment in accommodation. We need our operators to invest in their products, to upgrade aging infrastructure. I think that's key. People will come one time, but if they don't like the experience they have at a given accommodation, they're going to write about it on TripAdvisor now. Nothing's secret anymore in this sharing economy. You're going to get negative reviews. So our operators really need to read those type of things, take heed, because times aren't always going to be good. People aren't always going to be forced to stay in the aging places when times aren't so good. So they should take the time in the off season, reinvest in their properties to make sure that they come up to a standard that's going to keep people coming back. I think that's so important. Again, we talked before about seasonality. We've got to look to build experiences that are going to make people keep coming in the shoulder season. Look at experiences that we could develop and make winter sexy, so people will come in that season as well. So there's challenges on that front. But I think those are the big things. Access, we don't want to lose flights. When we see a flight go away, we see market share go immediately down. If they lose their way to get here, we lose customers. So we've got to make sure that we keep investing in these markets, keep Nova Scotia top of mind, make sure we keep those planes full. I know the total room nights are, and if you go right back to 2006, the numbers then were quite high also. Is it that we need more, or is it try to diversify when those room nights are, like you said, the winter attraction? I mean, I think actually I just seen that about Cape Breton trying to move their winter experience along the way. Is there a role for government to assist some of the operators to upgrade? And I know, going some of the frustration, just to plug your cell phone in, sometimes you have to unplug a bunch of lights. But is there a role for government to assist these operators? And is there any kind of program you see in the future that the government will have to put in place to assist them to maybe upgrade some of the accommodations? Did you want to take that? Well, we recently did an accommodation needs assessment where we surveyed visitors as to what their thoughts were on the accommodation offerings in Nova Scotia. So we've got a very clear idea of where we fall short in terms of infrastructure, in terms of quality, and that's a public document that's on our website now, and I think a lot of information can be gleaned from that. We do know that there's challenges with things that, as you intimated, with things like infrastructure around broadband.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've run out of time. We'll move to the Liberal Caucus and Ms. DiCostanzo.
Thank you very much. I just want to start by saying that I'm delighted to say that we have a couple of friends who invested in little hotels and motels across Nova Scotia. And there was a time when they could barely make ends meet. And the last 2-3 years, I mean, they are so happy and things are going so well for them that they're reinvesting and putting improvements. And as you were talking, they really are doing that, which is wonderful to see. My question is, what are you guys, or how do you look at the opportunity that we have to use the tourists that we're getting through the cruise companies? These tourists are really not spending very much, and if they spend, and it goes to the cruise companies, you know, a little bit, but we have them as captive market on the waterfront. Are we doing anything maybe to have something to tell them about the rest of Nova Scotia so we can get them to come back for a week or two? We need to target those thousands of people that are coming to get a taste, but to make them want to come back for 2 weeks. Do we have any programs to target this?
We do work with the Cruise Association, to provide them with information on our product offerings in Nova Scotia, with a view toward that they would be interested in coming back, although statistics say it's highly unlikely that they do. If you're a cruise type person, you tend to stick to cruise type vacations. As you said, they're not deemed really high yield. That said, they're incredibly important for tour operators, for restaurants, for retailers. That's what the message needs to be. What are our retail offerings that are in the ports? What can they do when we've got them as a captive audience for the few hours that they're in port? But you're right. It was I think it was our best cruise season in history. So we're all about those visitors as well, because while it's not filling our hotel rooms and making them stay overnight, it's definitely a huge benefit to our other operators.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much.
Go with. We're going to go with Mr. Jessam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm confident in saying that we all appreciate your time here today, and certainly your ongoing commitment to showcasing the wonders and the talents that Nova Scotia has to offer. So I'll start by saying thank you. I have some curiosities about you've referenced it over the course of your presentation today, but do you have a specific breakdown with respect to the different countries of origin or places of origin that our visitors come from? And you also referenced China as a destination that you're trying, or a market that you're trying to target. Two questions. Are there any other prospective markets that you're looking to as a place of opportunity to bring to the province? And I just lost my train of thought, sorry. Prospective markets, and are there places that surprised you that are first-time visitors to Nova Scotia that would fall into some of the data that you've collected to date?
I'm going to turn this over to my data expert, Anna.
Ms. Moran.
Thank you for the question. It's one of my favorite questions. Let's talk about where visitors are from. Right now, and I'm looking at the year-to-date, our most recently published numbers are for year-to-date November 2017. So if I'm looking at those numbers, what we know are that about for 85% of visitors to non-resident visitors to Nova Scotia come from Canada. And I actually don't have the numbers in front of me, so let me just look at a sheet where I actually do have the numbers in front of me. There we are. 86% of our non-resident visitors are from Canada. And if we break that down, close to 1/2 of our non-resident visitors are from other Atlantic Canadian provinces. 5% are from Quebec. 1/4 are from Ontario, and 8% are from Western Canada. But if we're looking at, and this is one of the things that I looked at in preparation for coming in here, because one of the things that I was looking at before we came here, and it's interesting, there was a mention made about the year 2002. And I have non-resident visitation to Nova Scotia going all the way back to 2002. And visitation to Nova Scotia from 2000 to about 2004 was hovering around the 2 million mark, and it reached a high of 2.2 million in 2004. That was the high point. And then visitation started going down. Mm-hmm. And in 2013, visitation was well below 2 million. And what we've seen between 2013 and 2017 is this amazing growth in visitation. We've seen, it's 20-some% growth in overall visitation. So if I'm looking for where the growth in visitation is coming from, it doesn't follow that same proportion. We've seen amazing growth from the province of Ontario. We've seen an increase of 190,000 visitors, actually 191,000 visitors from that market, compared to an increase of only 119,000 visitors from the largest market, which is Atlantic Canada. And that's great, because Ontario visitors spend a whole lot more in Nova Scotia. Now, if I look at the U.S., currently the United States makes up about 10% of the overall visitor population, and overseas markets make up about 4% of the visitor population. But again, if I'm looking at the growth in visitation, visitation from the U.S. made up 16% of the growth, and visitation from our overseas markets made up 5% of the growth. So the markets that we really want to see coming here and want to see increasing visitation to here, we're seeing that happening, and that's one of the things that I find really, really exciting about the kind of visitation that we're getting. In terms of priority markets, would you like to address that, or would you like me to continue? So we're not right now so much looking at new markets as much as we are looking at doing more in some of the markets that we're in. For example, the UK and Germany, we primarily support those markets through our in-market representation, which is a very good way to use a more limited marketing budget to get the best bang for our buck, mm-hmm. because our in-market reps have those relationships with the tour operators and the travel agents and with the airports, and they're very good influencers. But we would be looking at, if we could, doing more direct-to-consumer marketing. So same market, but additional marketing activities and tactics. Germany would be important. The United Kingdom would be important. We'd like to improve our marketing activities within Canada as well. The Western Canada is a market that's growing organically. So it is one that we would look at to leverage that organic growth with perhaps increased marketing activity.
Okay, thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'd also be curious about, you've referenced a number of national partners that you coexist with, and focused on the concept of bringing more visitors in through our airport. And also having referenced the competition for different, I'll call it airlines for lack of the specific term you used, but has there been any type of national discussion about bringing people in from outside, and then kind of from an internal perspective, any kind of initiative to make it more affordable, kind of collectively, for Canadians to travel interprovincially?
Ms. Saran?
This is a hot topic all across the country from coast to coast. I sit on a federal provincial territorial committee, and air access is the topic that everyone speaks of. We have some of the highest landing fees in the world, from what I understand, in Canada, and that's something that's constantly brought up in these forums. Whether there's a path or move afoot to change that, I don't know. That said, when we're talking about incentives to attract these air carriers to the area, these are things that the individual airports can waive through incentive packages to be attractive. We compete with other Canadian airports just as much as we do international airports. So while it's spoken of on a national level, it's in some cases it's kind of every airport on their own to develop these packages of incentives. But it's something we have a great relationship with the Halifax Airport. We're working closely with the Department of Business on this issue, and it's our hope that we'll be able to offer some better incentive packages going forward, so we're more competitive.
And just a comment. I look at the way that many local Nova Scotian companies kind of collaborate with respect to marketing. I mean, you referenced collaboration with our Atlantic provinces with respect to marketing, and I mean, correct me if I'm misinterpreting you, but it sounds like there's more of a competitive environment between the different airports in the nation versus kind of a collective effort to say, how do we bring people in? And maybe that's market trend in the industry, perhaps, but you know, just again with that sentiment about local companies partnering to, you know, for the greater good, you know, perhaps there's something there, who knows. Shift gears a little bit, I'd like to ask you about the population of, or the workforce, and specifically its youth presence. It's a seasonal industry for the most part, and I'd like you to comment on the prevalence or not of young people working in your shop and in the industry as a whole, please.
I'm going to turn that over to our Chief Operating Officer to give us the breakdown.
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. So our workforce we have operationally, we have our corporate office in Windsor, and we have a presence here in Halifax, and then we have our VICs across the province. We have a distribution center and a contact center that support our operational efforts. Our corporate group is a very diverse and young workforce, and we're very fortunate to have that youth and enthusiasm amongst us, the ones over 50 in the room that was mentioned earlier. But we have a very diverse workforce, and in the case of the VICs, 2 years ago we introduced a student ambassador program. And that program was, again, to provide youth an opportunity to work in the tourism sector. We thought it was well in line with the government's mandate to also provide youth an opportunity to gain work experience. So we took advantage of that opportunity, and we hired what we called youth ambassadors, to work at our VICs across Nova Scotia. And it was a great experience for us, as well as our employees, as well as, we hope, the students. They came in, the students did, with a lot of enthusiasm. They're tech savvy. Some of them spoke several languages. So they really added a lot of diversity to our workforce in those situations. And so the success, we again brought more students in last year, and we're going to continue that program this year as well. Because, again, it gives them a good opportunity to experience the visitor or the tourism industry. A lot of the students are taking tourism-related programming at the Nova Scotia Community College as an example. It gives them an opportunity to work face-to-face with a lot of different clients that come in, tourists, but they also see other aspects of our business. They've been involved in some of our staff development initiatives. They made videos on their work experience. very talented group of individuals. So again, we're looking at ways to keep our staff engaged across the organization. We do have a youthful workforce in corporately. Our VIC staff, though, are older employees because they've been working in those VICs for years, but adding the student element, they really appreciate it, having them in and providing mentorship for those students. And again, it was a very successful program.
Perhaps that youthful component to your workforce will assist with any type of transition planning for when the group that is working in VICs across the province now, for when they decide that it's time to retire and take some time for themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
I think my time is...
Order time has expired. I'd like to thank you for answering our questions today and provide you with some time to provide some closing comments. Ms. Saran.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. Tourism Nova Scotia has taken the Ivany Commission's urgent call to action seriously. With guidance from our private sector board, we're applying a business lens to everything we do and using research to make decisions that will fuel growth for the industry and improve Nova Scotia's economic outlook. To reach $4 billion in tourism revenues by 2024, tourism stakeholders will need to continue to innovate and evolve to respond to consumer demands and travel trends. Tourism Nova Scotia, in partnership with private sector businesses, will offer world-class experiences and invest in marketing programs that will capture the attention of travelers. Increased investment in marketing will be critical to reaching our revenue targets. We'll continue to work with our airport and provincial government to establish and maintain strong air connections between Nova Scotia and priority tourism markets. As we attract more higher-spending visitors to the province, our partnership with the Tourism Industry Association of Nova Scotia will enhance quality and expand accommodation capacity. We will continue to evaluate all aspects of our business to ensure we're delivering on our mandate and spending taxpayers' dollars wisely. As we kick off 2018, I'm pleased to share that Nova Scotia will host Canada's largest tourism business event, Rendezvous Canada, from May 13th to 16th at the Halifax Convention Centre. Over 1,800 tourism professionals, including 500 tour operators and travel agents from 20 countries, will descend upon Halifax for sales meetings and a first-hand glimpse of Nova Scotia. Tourism Nova Scotia will host familiarization tours to give delegates a taste of all regions of the province. This event is expected to immediately generate $5.5 million in provincial economic impact. 2018 is also the Canada-China Year of Tourism. In 2017, we received an additional $500,000 in our budget to increase marketing activities in the lucrative China market. We're excited for the opportunities of this initiative and our marketing dollars that our marketing dollars will bring. We've had 4 exceptional years of tourism growth, and we're optimistic that high levels of visitation and revenue will continue. We thank our industry and all tourism stakeholders for embracing change, as well as Nova Scotians for their important tourism ambassadors. We thank Minister McClellan and his government colleagues for their support, and we hope all of you will support our efforts going forward as we work on the behalf of Nova Scotians to grow our economy and make the province an even better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one item of committee business. On January 17th, the subcommittee met and came to a decision on a number of topics for future witnesses. That information is before you. We do need to gain approval from the full committee to proceed with scheduling of these witnesses. Are there any questions or comments on the list? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion that these witnesses and topics be approved for scheduling for future committee meetings? Mr. Gordon Wilson.
Yes, I'd like to make that motion, just with noting also for the witnesses under the topic for the PCs with Nova Scotia Health Authority, that there be the Deputy Minister of Health and Wellness there. And that under the NDP topics for Department of Environment, that would be the Deputy Minister of Environment. Under Community Services and Health, that would be both deputies for that. And Department of Business, it would be the Deputy Minister of Business. Or if they have subordinates that they would like to appoint to that. Those
recommendations put forth by Gordon Wilson, are they acceptable to the committee? I'm seeing agreement. Our clerk will make note of that. The motion before the committee is that the subjects, the topics, and the witnesses be approved with the clarification by Mr. Gordon Wilson for witnesses. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? The motion is carried, and our clerk will make note of that. Our next meeting is January 31st, next week, and it will be with the Department of Community Services to discuss the transformation of the ESIA system. That's the Employment and Income Assistance Supports system. Thank you for being here with us here today. This meeting is now adjourned.